Does getting your podcast off the ground feel like an uphill battle? Maybe you've been publishing episodes for a while and you're not seeing the results you want. Or perhaps you're feeling burnt out from all the work that comes with regularly putting out high quality episodes. If you can relate to any of these feelings, you need to hear this episode. Because we'll be speaking with a veteran in the podcasting space who launched their show 10 years ago. And over the past decade, he's learned many lessons from his successes. But above all, attributes his setbacks and failures as some of the most pivotal moments that have helped him get to where he is today. If you need a boost of inspiration and motivation to keep you going with your podcast, you're about to get it. My guest today is the host of the top-rated entrepreneur podcast, Join Up Dots, a Steve Jobs-inspired podcast that gives listeners the confidence to go after what they want in life by sharing startup stories, struggles, and honest conversations, along with training and coaching. The show receives roughly 200,000 downloads a month. It's been running for almost 10 years, and with almost 1,800 episodes published to date, it's fair to say that my guest today is a true podcast veteran. In addition to his work in podcasting, he is also an online business coach with a passion for helping others avoid burnout and excel in business and podcasting. David Ralph, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I'll be honest, when you said 1,800, I thought, God, I thought it was more than that. Is that what I've done, 1,800? I thought I was into the 3,000s, 4,000s.
Well, I might need to make a correction on that, if that is the case, because I'm just going by what I saw on Apple Podcasts.
Let's not quibble over 2,000. But anyway, it does seem like I've done an awful lot.
You have. There is absolutely no doubt about it. And I am super excited to really get into the story behind this amazing podcast that you've produced. So I want to go back to the start, really. And I know that you previously used to think that the harder you work, the faster you would get the results you wanted. And you now consider this mentality not only to be wrong, but bloody stupid after it resulted in stress and burnout and, as in your words, looking like a 100-year-old. Can you talk us through how you came to this realization?
Well, I think I cleaned that up. I think I used to say I look like a 100-year-old scrotum. I think that's that's what I used to say. How did I come to this realization? Well, I still think you have to work hard. There's no getting away from it. If you're sitting on a sofa just watching Netflix all the time, you're not going to get the results you want. But I think the mistake that I made was just working really hard, not getting the results, and not stopping to think, is there a different way? And I think that's the key thing. There's times when your business or your podcast or whatever needs to be left behind because you can't see the wood for the trees. And so I would say that I still say you have to work hard, but I now say work hard, work lazy. And what I mean by that is it's as good to be away from your computer and your microphone for 3 or 4 days as it is sitting in front of it. That's where the ideas come. That's the realization. That's when you go, oh yeah, I can see why I'm getting those results. But when you're just bashing out episode after episode or whatever you're doing, it just becomes a monotonous forest you're sort of plowing through. So I think that's what I mean by that. Work hard, but be focused, know your direction. And if you're stumbling, then it's all right to stop for a moment.
Yeah, I think balance is so important. I personally love running and yoga, and I find that as long as I dedicate time to both those things, it gives me a certain clarity of mind when I do come back to my computer and I do go to work. So I find those two so essential. But I'm really curious, could you give us an idea of what your life was like? You obviously talked about how you were working super hard, you were stressing yourself out. Can you give us a rundown of what your daily life looked like before you realized that you needed to make a change, otherwise you'd burn out?
Well, there was 2 things. Number one, I didn't make the change and I did burn out, and I got acute burnout, which is like the worst burnout. You know, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to get the best. And so I got to the point where my hair was dropping out. I had off the scale cholesterol, 6 weeks from a stroke and a heart attack. It was like just stupid times. But funnily enough, beforehand, I was a corporate guy. And I worked for a bank up in London. I got bored with that. So I thought, let's take things a bit easier. And so I worked locally for 10 years to a very nice company. And then I thought to myself, no, it's time to take things even easier. And so I quit to start my own business. And it just went wrong. It went wrong that the fact that because it was my own business and I was controlling the income generation, I lost track of the control in myself. And I just worked just incredibly long hours. And when you've got like an internet business, you can be on call all hours. And I didn't want to say no to anyone. That was the key thing. I had no boundaries. So if I was speaking to somebody who was in Colombia and their time was convenient at 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever, I'd be there. And then I could be there at Australia. So I remember going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, waking up at 4, getting back to work. And it took me to my knees. But I had many points, many dots leading up to it where I could, quite frankly, have gone, please help me. But I think I was so stubborn and I was so determined to make a success of it. And I was trebly sure that I didn't want anybody from the job that I left to go, yeah, see, you should have stayed where you were. I just kept on plowing forward. Now, ultimately, you could argue that I got the results I wanted, but I don't think it was worth it on the health issues that I went through, because it's taken me nearly 6 years to really get that burnout out of my system. I'm a bit of an expert on burnout now, had no idea beforehand, but it's not one of those things that you can just do a weekend retreat and you're back on track. It's a real effort to get yourself back and healthy.
I'd be curious to know, what was the business that you went into?
Potentially the two most boring jobs you could ever have. I did both of them, 10 years in banking, 10 years in insurance. And then when I quit, I went into becoming a web developer. And I thought, oh, yeah, I'll do some web developing. I'll create websites for people that I was doing like as a sideline. And after about 3 or 4 days of that, I suddenly thought, I hate this. I can't do this for a living. There's no one here. I'm quiet. There's no office banter. And that was one of my big dots, because I thought, oh, I know, there's these things called podcasts. And I listened to a podcast, and it was just a random pick. And then I listened to the guest who said he was launching his podcast. And then I listened to the other guest who was on his podcast. And within 3 episodes, I thought I could do this. And then it changed my life forever. And finally, all those 3 guys have been on my own podcast and I've been on theirs. So it was a kind of real journey that went round. But it was no more clever than thinking, I want control of my time. I want control of my freedom. And until a certain period passed, totally lost it, mate.
That's a fair goal to strive for. I can definitely relate to that as well myself. So you mentioned there about like how podcasting almost blossomed in your life because you were looking for a sense of connection where that void had kind of like appeared. Because
yeah.
So this was what, 2013, 2014? You said you launched the podcast in 2014, right?
Yeah.
April 2014.
Correct. Yeah. So it was 2013 when I quit my job in October.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a period of time, got up to Christmas,
mm-hmm.
and then just didn't really do much,
mm-hmm.
just wallied around like we say in the United Kingdom. And then in January, I started thinking I'm going to do this podcasting job. So I recorded 60 podcasts in the next 2 months and then launched on the 30th of April.
That's really inspiring to hear. And I do understand that one of your inspirations for this podcast, or a big inspiration, was Steve Jobs. And I realize it's been a big influence, for this podcast. Can you talk us through how this American business magnate inspired or influenced Join Up Dots?
You know, my whole show is called Join Up Dots. And the concept of it is, as Steve Jobs said in a famous speech, you don't know how you get to somewhere until you look back and connect the dots, he said. And I was at work in this insurance company, and a guy went off to the dentist. And, you know, when you're in a dentist, you're sort of waiting to go in. You might pick up one of these, what we used to call ladies' magazines, Marie Claire or whatever, and you just sort of flick through it to kill the time. Anyhow, he flicked through it, and there was this speech from Steve Jobs that he did at Stanford University. And it was about 3 short stories of Steve Jobs' life and how he looked back and he couldn't have got to where he was without these things. And one of them was a bad thing, one of them was a good thing, but they joined up. And he just threw it on my desk. He said, I've just come back from the dentist. You should read this. And I went, yeah, go on, and I will. And I read it, and I thought, this is bloody brilliant. This is really, really good. And it just touched me somewhere. I don't know what it was, whether it was the truth in it, whether I was at that stage in my life that I was looking for something else. But I thought to myself, this is good. So I took it home, read it on the train going home. And when I got home, I thought to myself, if I create a podcast, I'm going to call it Connect the Dots. Anyhow, I looked for the URL, couldn't get that, so I just called it Join Up Dots. It was the cheapest thing. And it led me from there. But I don't own any Apple products. I've got nothing to do with anything other than that speech. But that whole speech still resonates to me today. And whenever I play it to anyone, and we do on the show every single time, really, they go, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And what it literally says is, look, You're not going to have the answers. You just got to trust that what you've lived up to that point has given you a certain amount of knowledge, a certain amount of experience that you can then figure it out moving forward. And I think that is the blueprint for everyone. No one knows where they're going to get to. You're living in Colombia at the moment, but when you was in Bristol, don't believe that was on your cards.
No, it was not.
But you end up there, you make the best of it, and and life changes. And sometimes you have these decisions that are remarkable and you think, thank God for that. And the funny enough, the things that go really badly, like my burnout and a lot of other stuff, when you get far enough away from it, you think, I'm in such a better position because of that. That was like my learnings. You don't gain many learnings from success, but you do from the things that go really badly. So it works as a sort of white dot, black dot. The black dots become white dots when you're further away, and the white dots lead you to success.
That's awesome. And I can see the influence. Like, now you talk me through it, because I think a lot of it comes down to confidence. Confidence, like you repeated again and again on your show, just to be able to go out there and try things out. And I have to say that it's, yeah, exactly like the example you gave there. Of course, I was worried about leaving the UK and going to find another life abroad, but I just knew that, you know what, I can buy a plane ticket back. As long as I got the money on my account, I can buy a plane ticket back. And it's the same with starting a business or anything you go out and do. Like, even if you start a business and it doesn't work, you can still go back and find a job. And I think most people are afraid of starting or trying something, but they fail to realize that even if it doesn't work out, you can usually go back.
There's always a way that you can pay the bills if you throw the ego away. I remember in the early days of Join Up Dots, and it wasn't going very well. I wasn't getting clients through. I didn't really understand the marketing and all that kind of stuff. I started delivering curries in the evening. I walked past a curry house, Indian place, and they said, we need a driver. And I thought, well, that's easy money. And so I did that. I was always really worried that one of the people opening the door would be somebody that I used to work with. That was the only thing. And that was the ego. Again, that was the ego sort of saying, you want to look a success. You want to feel proud about yourself. But once you throw that away and you think to yourself, no, if I need to pay this bill, there's a job out there, there's a bit of income or whatever that I can go and do. And it could be mowing somebody's lawn. It could be filling shelves up in Tesco's, whatever. Throw the ego away, and I think you are probably 60% towards where you want to be. I think that is the anchor that drags us around. And I think that is why people don't try stuff, because they don't want to look like they failed. Fail again, because the worst thing that happens is that you learn what hasn't worked and it moves you closest to the success door.
Yeah, that is very inspiring. And I think that our ego can hold us back in so many ways. And it's awesome to hear that you have that backstory, and it wasn't always smooth sailing for you. And I do kind of want to talk about that in the sense of, what was your first year of podcasting like when you started Join Up Dots? So from April 2014 to 2015, what did that look like?
It was a complete grind because I was doing everything myself. I was fortunate, actually. There was two things looking back that was really fortunate. Number one, I realized that it wasn't the recording of podcasts that was the effort. It was the post-production and putting all the music on and stuff. So within one episode, I learned how to play all the music and stuff so that I could hear it, my guests could hear it, that I could click and get the levels right at the same time. So I did a good thing there, working out how to basically produce a podcast episode while I'm doing it. And so at the end of it, I say goodbye to the guest, and basically I click produce, and the music's in place, the audio's levels, the outer sounds that you want to sort of get rid of, that's all gone. So, but that was a really good thing. The other thing that I think was a grind was I didn't realize how quickly you go through podcasts. So I was doing a 7-day-a-week show. And so you've got 60 days and you think, well, that's easy. And then suddenly 30 days of those is gone. And you're trying to just fill that bucket all the time with another one. So when I got to my year and I wrote out to my listeners and said to them, what do you want from Join Up Dots for the second year? And they said less of it. I thought, first of all, I felt a bit hurt, but I didn't realize that they were trying to listen to every episode. And that was an hour plus every single day. That's a lot of content. I just assumed that they would just pick one up every now and again, but I had some really loyal listeners at the beginning. So when they said, go down 3 days a week, that was suddenly, that was a game changer. And as I produce everything so quickly now, I could go twice a day, really. I've got so much content, I've got so many ideas, I've got so many guests out there that it wouldn't be hard for me to go twice a day, like a morning show on the radio and an evening show. But you've got to say that sometimes there's too much content. You've got to realize that it's better to say really worthwhile stuff than just saying stuff because you've got a podcast to release.
Yeah, whenever there's that deadline, I personally am someone that really likes to plan ahead. And the reason I like to do that is because I hate being in the scenario. I've never really been in the scenario, and I never want to put myself in the scenario of saying, oh, that'll do.
Yeah.
Because it's like anything that I do, I want to do it well. And obviously, same with your podcast, anything you put out is associated with your name.
You don't always hit home. I've listened back. I listened back to all my shows, and some of them I think I've done a good job. And then I listen back and I think, well, it wasn't quite what I was wanting to express. But you can't get it right all the time. And that was something that I realized as well. I think this whole show is about ego, really, that as long as you've done your best, it's not always going to work. But it is funny how some of the shows that I think have hit the mark, I get more response from people. Some of the shows when I've been really open and really honest. I did one recently where I'd had about 2 weeks of depression, and I'm not known for depression, and I couldn't understand it, but I felt really sort of down and just blue. And I did a podcast episode about it. I got so much response from that. So you can't guess what the audience wants. You've just got to do your best, and your best is going to be good enough.
Yeah, I think doing your best is something that's so not appreciated as much as it should be in society, because there's all this idea of like trying to obtain certain standards, and really doing your best is the best that you can do. So I think that's really important. And you did actually mention something. So obviously you talked about the capacity, like how much you're putting out, and then you remedied that based on like what your listeners said. And you also mentioned that one of the issues that you faced early on was post-production. Did it get to a point when you outsourced the post-production, and when did that happen? What did that look like?
No, I'm still doing it all myself.
Nice.
I don't do anything. As I say, it's such a streamlined process that the only thing that I do, I create an audio profile of the room, first of all. And it's just 3 seconds, 5 seconds of myself breathing, my air conditioning. Because when I started, I used to think it had to be perfectly quiet in the room, and you couldn't have the door open, you couldn't have the fan on, whatever. And then I realized that you could actually create that as like a white noise profile, and then at the end of the podcast isolate that from your recording. So that was a good one. And then I, as I say, quickly moved on to, within one episode, thinking, if I'm going to do this every day, I'm spending an hour and a half with the guest, and I'm spending about 45 minutes putting the sounds on in the back. That's 2 hours a day. I couldn't do it. So I looked at it and thought, how do I bring that forward? And it still blows me away, the amount of podcasters that pay for people to do it, or they're doing it themselves and they're spending 3 or 4 hours per show. They're cutting out the ums and ahs. We wouldn't do that in a pub. When you're in a pub, you don't worry about your ums and ahs. You just talk. So you got to edit yourself as well. You've got to be able to learn how to communicate without doing those things. And it's really amazing, actually, because now I meet people that I used to work with, and they say to me, we always knew you'd be a podcaster. And I always think, you liar. You didn't know that, because I didn't know myself. Or they say, oh, you've got the voice for it. You've always had the voice for it. But it's just because I've now trained myself to understand certain vocal nuances. On this podcast, I'm trying to talk like a normal person. When I'm presenting my own show, I do it in a very different way. There's a much bigger energy on it, because I realized early doors, once again, that if I wasn't putting any energy into it, the guest kind of matches. And then it becomes a very flat conversation. If you start high and bouncy, they've got nowhere to go than to come up to you. And then you get a much better show. So it's all those kind of things that I've learned. But I was lucky that I learned really, really early doors.
That's really cool. And I have to say, I completely understand where you're coming from. I produced and host a number of shows for a number of companies. And I taught myself how to edit them in the early days. And even though I have to admit, I really, really hate the process of editing. I really hate the process of doing all of it. But at the same time, one thing I really like is that you can have complete control of the finished product. And if you have a vision in mind of how something's going to sound, you can produce that. And you don't have to explain it to someone else. You don't have to send it off and try and put it into words, you can have full control over it. So even though it's like I have a love-hate relationship with it, editing and producing the post-production of podcasts, because I obviously hate the process, but I love the output. I love being able to have that control over what that final episode actually sounds like.
It's funny because I had a radio station come through to me and they said, "Oh, we really like what you do. Can you do a radio show? Would you be able to do it?" And first of all, I thought, yeah, sounds good. Me being a DJ, quite fancy that. And then I thought to myself, I don't actually fancy sitting there for 2 minutes not talking. And it was a silly thing to think, but I just thought I like filling in the gaps based on a theme. So you decide on the theme of a podcast and then you create that whole mood, that atmosphere. I didn't want to just be having 2 seconds of this is the news, this is this between songs. So I sort of said to him, no, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, the old ego spoke for a moment. Oh, I quite fancy this being a DJ, but not now. Not now. It's a podcaster.
Yeah, I get that. The two seem like very different kind of domains. I think I'm more on your side as well, of wanting to more be a podcaster. I've never thought about radio, but it doesn't really appeal to me. So I do want to go back to that first year. What did listenership look like when you first started out that first year?
Terrible. Absolutely terrible. When I launched, first day, and I had a big build up. I did a load of Facebook adverts saying new shows coming, you know, entrepreneur show, blah, blah, blah. And I thought it was going to instantly hit home. And I thought I'd done everything right. I'd had a big build up. I'd spent money on the marketing. And the first day I got 45. And that was basically me clicking to see if it was working, I imagine. And then the next day it went up to about 75. And then the next day, I think it was 110. I thought, oh, this is going on the right way. And then it dropped. And I thought, oh, what's happening? You know, they hate the show, whatever. It wasn't that. It was such a small proportion. Those people might have been ill. Those people might have gone off on holiday. You don't know. And so I luckily just thought to myself, if no one's listening, then this is my chance to get better at it. And that was my mindset. I just thought I'd rather be not very good whilst no one's listening than 100,000 people saying you're rubbish, you shouldn't be doing it. So I just got my head down and kept on doing it. And I kind of felt that I was going to be good at it. There might be people out there that argue that, but I just felt in my heart of hearts it was something that naturally fitted me. And so I just kept on producing and producing. And I think it was probably about 6 months, really, that I started to see an audience come to me. And then it went up, like they say, the old hockey stick. It went up. And then, funnily enough, it plateaued. And then I stopped marketing as well. And then it dropped down again. And that was an interesting one because I realized, okay, a lot of the audience aren't coming to you because they're loyal. They're coming to you because they just found you and they're interested. And that's when I really started changing the content to be about the customer, the avatar, the listener, really thinking about what they would want. And in the early days, it was just me doing interviews. And then I started putting my own stuff in and trying to bring my own experience in. And then it started growing.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, I find it really interesting you talked there about like there's a correlation between like how you marketed yourself and how people found you. Like what do you think were maybe in those early days were some of the most significant steps that you took to market the show that you really saw a response from? And obviously you mentioned maybe they didn't always stick around, but I'd be interested to know what they were.
I did Google ads, then I did Facebook ads, then I did LinkedIn. I don't think any of these things really work as marketing. And I realized then that the only thing that you can do is not worry about the audience, not worry about the listener. And I think the numbers don't make a difference at all. You can make a very nice living on very few numbers. It's all about understanding what you're actually doing the podcast for, not about target figures and audience. I know there's that old thing about putting sponsorship on, which I've never done because I just don't like it. I think it stops the flow and stuff. But I think that if you want to be a podcaster, you find out what you are going to market and you build the podcast around that. Totally different from how I did it when I launched a podcast and then thought, how the hell am I going to make money from this? And went the opposite way. Start with your thing. If you're a business owner, start about how you can express your knowledge to get leads in. Don't worry about the numbers.
That's some really good advice. And you kind of mentioned there about how you don't need too much to get by, really. And I want to know, like, how were you first able to monetize or earn revenue from Join Up Dots, and how has this progressed?
How did I do it? God, it's hard to think going back in time. I did a lot of stupid things. In the early days, I would, spend all night working with somebody for £50 and stuff. Very first thing I did was launch Podcasters Mastery. And it wasn't teaching people how to podcast. It was teaching people how to podcast fast, because I realized it's not hard to launch a podcast, but how to do the technical stuff that I do. A lot of people still want that. So I marketed that. Then I did one on Interview Masterclass, which is still out there now, which is going all right. Then I moved into the business coaching world. And then funnily enough, I thought I was going to be teaching people how to start businesses. The biggest income that I earn through Join Up Dots is business owners that listen. And because I only work on the podcast one day a month, and I literally don't come near my computer through days and days and days, they were intrigued and wanted to know how I was doing it, and they weren't. And that became my money spinner, which it wasn't one of the dots at the beginning. I didn't think that was even a thing. But once that started coming to me, I started to think, oh, yeah, I do things differently. I don't do Facebook. I don't do LinkedIn. I don't do social media. But I've still got a very successful business and podcast. How am I doing it? And then I started sort of joining up the dots again, to use that phrase.
Fantastic. And how did you impart this knowledge onto them? Did you just do one-on-one coaching, or did you then start recording videos? What was your first few steps into sharing this knowledge?
First ones, I did it free. I said to them, look, I'll do this free for you, because I didn't know the knowledge myself. So I was kind of teaching it. I'd be saying to them, oh, yeah, this is what I do, that's what I do. And so I gave it to them free, but I said, I want a recording of it. And then I went back and watched the recordings and started fleshing it out. In past life, I was a trainer. I used to have to create training courses, 2 or 3 hours. And I was always aware of the flow of training. And basically, you do it like the news. You tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. And all news is like that. Tonight's news, and then they tell you, and then they break it down, and then they summarize it at the end. And so I sort of worked on everything based on that. So it was a lot of one-to-one at the beginning. Then it went to group coaching, but now it's going to be the videos, really.
That's awesome. I think that's so fantastic that you're able to share this knowledge, especially because did I hear you right? You said you spend 1 day a month on the podcast. Is that right?
Yeah,
wow.
That's it. Well, I lie, actually, thinking about it. What I mean on that is I do 1 day a month interviewing guests. But if I have a bit of inspiration about something, like I will be in the shower and I think, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, or something I hear on the radio or whatever, I'm always thinking of content ideas. I will come up, turn on the microphone, and basically within an hour and a half, bashed out 4 podcast episodes, whatever. So that doesn't feel like working. That just feels like I'm just doing it when I fancy it, and then I can go off. So if I don't want to do it, I don't do it. And if I do want to do it, but 1 day a month is the only time that I've got to be here, because I've got from 8 till, well, now it's 20 to 7 in the evening. So 12 hours of interviewing people, and then that's all done. And then I kind of forget about Join Up Dots, really.
That must be an intense day, but at the same time, I think it's fantastic that you're able to batch it. I know from so many podcast hosts that I've spoken to, that seems to be the most efficient way of doing things. And you take questions from your audience. How did that start? Was it a case of they were asking you questions, maybe via social media, or did you encourage them to reach out with questions?
I didn't even encourage them. I remember the very first episode I released, the next day I got an email from a lady in Germany. I'd love to remember what her name was now. And it was like a sort of career advice. It wasn't even something I was talking about. And I helped her in my best way I possibly could. And then I started to get them sort of randomly. And then I thought to myself, hang on, this is going to get out of hand, because I'm going to be spending all the time trying to respond. I need to find a better way of doing it. So I created a Facebook group called Dream Starters Academy, it was called. And it was for these people who could then ask me something in a centralized area. But I realized that didn't work, because the people that wanted to ask something were scared of sharing it in a sort of different format. And so I basically went back to recording podcast episodes. So how I answer them now, I still get loads of questions. Some of them I will record a video and embed it into an email and send it back to them. So I just put the microphone on. I use a thing called Bomb Video, and it does like a GIF of me. They click on the video, it takes them to a link, they can see me. That works really well because I've actually made the effort. They can see me, they can think, oh my God, he looks like that or whatever. And I give them advice. Others I will actually respond to in email, but the majority I will go back to them and say, if you listen to this episode, I've answered it on the podcast. And so I kind of do it that way. And then that means that I can keep up, because if you email me, you get an out of hours response, and pretty much it says something along the lines of, if you're a listener, you will get an answer within 48 hours. And I try to keep on that, because I think if I haven't got listeners, then what's the point in doing the show? That's the only reason for it. So I'm very big on trying to respond. And I say on the show, if you haven't had a response, just drop me a line and I will respond, because I feel like I'm on top of it, but maybe I've missed one.
I admire your dedication. I can see why you have such a hardcore fan base with that level of value that you strive to give back to them.
Well, you got to do it. You got to do it, Sam, because they're the ones that fuel me up. Because if I think that I've changed someone's life for the better, and I've had messages from Mexico and Peru and Australia and Thailand, and the other day I had a lovely one from Bhutan in Nepal and Mongolia. And I think, really? They're listening to me? And I still think that. I think, why? And I've had some where the lady first said, I'm addicted to your show. She said, I found your voice really annoying, first of all. You sounded like Peppa Pig. That was the first thing she said. And then there was another guy who came from Canada, and he was South American, lived in Canada. And he said, I'm trying to learn English from you. You do speak very quickly. And I listened back to the early shows, and I think it was enthusiasm. I did sort of get quite fast. So they help me get better as well. They teach me things that I didn't know, or I didn't know I knew until it comes out. So they're my bread and butter.
I'm glad to see that you've had that impact. I do want to pivot slightly, because I know that we've spoken about like the fact that you have guests on the show. There's a lot of pitches out there. I want to know, you get pitched a lot, I'm guessing. Do you know how much you get pitched? Like, do you have a rough ballpark figure of how much you get pitched, maybe a week or a month?
I would say 40 a day, ballpark.
Oof. RIP your inbox.
Yeah. I had to separate them into a different inbox. So basically that out of hours response says, if you're pitching, it's not looked at in this email, send it to another one, And so I've got joinupdots@gmail.com, which I say on the show, that's for listeners. And then I've got joinupdotsbooking@gmail.com for any pitches. And you can come onto the website and you can ask to be a guest yourself, and that goes to the booking email. So I can keep that separate. But I'll be honest, I used to try to look at all of them and go back with a nice response saying why they weren't right now. Or yes, they can come on the show. It just became a tsunami. And a lot of them were incredibly boring, and I couldn't be bothered to read through them. So it's the only staff member I've got. I've got a guy called James who goes through them for me. And occasionally I send them across to me and say, what do you think about this person, whatever. But pretty much he knows what I'm going to go for. And so he plows through it for me.
And what does James look out for? Like, what are some of the things that he looks out for to know, like, you know what, David might like this one?
If they say they're a business coach that has gotten some new life-changing program, that's a no. That's instant. Everyone says that. So I don't want that. If they say that they're really humorous, then I say no, because they're not. And what I mean by that is nobody ever tells you that they're funny if they're funny. And so if I've got to tell you certain things about themselves, it's not. And I failed on that a few times in the early days, that somebody said, I'm a humorous storyteller, and they weren't. They were really, really boring. So that gets deleted. But pretty much the things we go for is just, the backstory. I don't even care if they've just launched their business. But if they have been thinking about it, if they've been listening to the podcast and then they've decided to do it and they're proud that they've launched, then they come on the show, because I'm glad I can be of some support to get them a bit of marketing. If there's somebody that is in their first 3 or 4 months and stuff, that's interesting to my audience, because a lot of them are thinking of doing their own businesses. So it's better to have somebody who is, 3 months ahead of them more than somebody who's 15 years ahead of them. Oh, that's another one. If they send me a picture with them standing by a personal jet, that's yes or no. So there's sort of lots of things, but a lot of it comes down to what I think is honesty and transparency. And a lot of these kind of influencer kind of people that think that showing me their bling and their chains and that they're standing next to some famous person or they're doing a keynote presentation in 100,000 people, that just leaves me cold. So I say no. I want my show to be 2 steps ahead of the listener, if that makes sense, Sam.
Yeah, I get that. And I also really like the fact that you really look out for the little guy.
Yes.
In the sense that you mentioned about like it being the first 3 or 4 months into their business, you really give them the spotlight. You look past all these people trying to show off how great they are, how rich they are, and all of that, which is just noise. And you really go for the story and just their authenticity.
Yeah. I don't want to speak to somebody for an hour plus who I don't believe in. You know, end of story. I want to feel them. I want to feel connection to their hustle, their passion. And I tell you, a guy before this I recorded, and this is one of the things I say to my guests. A lot of them say to me, how do you want me to be for your listeners? And I say, if you think you're going to come here and be Superman, throw it away, you know, because that doesn't work for an audience. They can see through it. But somebody just saying, oh, I've had a really bad day today, or yeah, I've had a good month, but the last 2 months have been bad. You know, that's real. That's up and down. That's life. That's entrepreneurship. Sometimes you do really well and you think you're a genius, and the next thing falls flat. So I don't like anybody to present that Instagram going out for a drink and you're all standing there looking like you're having a big party while the person looking at it is sitting on their own in their flat thinking everybody else is having a good life.
Yeah, and something you said really stood out for me about the importance of actually wanting to have a conversation with a person. Because I think that podcasting is one of the best ways to have conversations with people that you can truly connect with, regardless of where they are. And I've met so many fascinating people through my experience podcasting. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Why would you want to spend an hour chatting to someone that you're not really interested in just because you think, oh, they've got all the shiny stuff on Instagram that my listeners are gonna want or falsely assume?
Yeah, I got invited onto a show once, and a guy said to me, and this was a long time ago, but he said to me, "These are the questions I'm going to ask," and you did that, and that's one of the things that kind of almost turned me off, because I always think that if you went out for a drink with somebody and they pulled out a list of things they want to ask you, you'd think, this is weird. You know, who would do that? And so with podcasts, I think they should just be natural conversation. But this guy sent me the list. And as he started talking, I thought he's going through this list of questions and I could read along with him. It was just totally contrived. And I don't want to feel contrived. I want to feel that I'm passionate and enthusiastic, and that person's really making me want to sort of get excited. So it's all these kind of little things where podcasting can fall away from the basis of what it's all about, and it's building relationships and connection with the guest so that the listeners feel like they're eavesdropping in on something, that they're hearing something that is useful, but they shouldn't be hearing. It's the Wizard of Oz pulling the curtains back and seeing what's really going on. And I think that's where podcasts really become powerful. Without rambling on too much, I did hear a podcast the other day. I never listened to podcasts, but I heard Rick Astley, the singer from the 1980s and stuff, talking. And he was talking really openly about how his dad wasn't a very nice person and stuff. And he cried a few times on the podcast. And at the end of it, I thought, that's what a podcast is about. That is about somebody forgetting that anyone else is listening and just having a conversation with that one person.
Yeah, I love those podcasts. And I think that it takes it's difficult because I've often felt conflicted about that. Like I do prepare the questions beforehand, but I should add that like I don't rigidly follow them like a police interrogation, as you probably found out. But I have felt somewhat conflicted in that. But I should say that I am the type of person that likes to plan everything. I like to arrive early. I like to make sure everything's prepared. So that comes to my personality. So I definitely feel that having these.
Yeah, but that's good, Sam. I'm jumping in there. But what you're doing, you're preparing. Okay. And as they say, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. But I will tell you this, that you can never pre-write a question that's better than what pops in your head because of the conversation. You just can't do it, you know? But when you're having a conversation with somebody and you think, oh, that's interesting, they generally will say, oh, that's a great question. I've never been asked that before, because they've never had that exact conversation before.
Yeah, definitely. And I think interviewing is a skill that most people don't realize that you really do need to develop.
Agree totally.
Fantastic, excellent. Well, I do have some more questions that I really do want to cover with you. So where do you host Join Up Dots, and why do you pick this platform?
Where do I host it? I host it on Libsyn, and no other reason than I Googled, and that was the first one that came up.
And you like it? How long you been with that for? So you've been almost, what, 10 years with that?
Yeah, over 10 years. I've been over 10 years on
So
there.
you must like
and
it.
one of the reasons I didn't move, whether this is true or not, but I heard rumors that if you moved, you lost all your iTunes reviews. You couldn't carry those across. Yeah, so I looked at it and thought, oh, it makes no difference. And it does what it says on the tin. You know, it hosts my show and that's it. So I can't imagine that I would move to anybody else, because I don't see any reason to do that.
And what do you consider to be your greatest success in podcasting?
Keeping going, really. It might sound a bit of a flippant answer, but I have people and they say to me, are you still doing that podcasting thing? And I go, yeah, I'm a podcaster. That's what I do for a living, you know. And I'm proud of the fact that at the moment I'm 5 months ahead of schedule. And if I really knuckled down, I could be a year ahead of schedule. I've got so much content, so many ideas. I've got a Google Drive packed with thousands of potential podcast episodes. One of the things I use now is artificial intelligence to sort of analyze podcasts and break it down into sections and stuff. So that's good. So I'm using the current sort of technology. But yeah, I think that's my biggest thing, that I'm still doing it.
That is fantastic. Congratulations. And I want to touch on something you mentioned there about using tools. That brings to mind, is it like ChatGPT, or do you use something else?
No, I use ChatGPT. That's exactly it. And I take blog posts and I get them to analyze it, all based around the theme of my show. And then it breaks it down into subjects. And then I take those subjects and I say, niche this down into 10 key things. And then it just keeps on producing content. And then I literally could come up to my office on my own and go, right, I'm going to talk about that one today. Bang, turn on the microphone and away I go. And by the time I walk out, I've got a week's worth of content.
It is indeed a fantastic tool. I wanted to ask you actually, like, what do you think it takes to create a successful podcast? But considering your last response, I'm guessing, would you say consistency?
That's part of it. That's certainly part of it. I think you need to have a good start and a good finish. And that comes back from my training days when I used to stand up and do training courses. I knew that people would walk into the room going, right, okay, entertain me or educate me. And then the middle bit, they drift off a bit and think about what's lunch. And then at the end, you've got to sort of bring it all together. So I think you've got to have a good end and a good finish so that people feel satisfied. I don't know about you, Sam, but I've listened to some podcasts and you think, what was the point of that? It was just like two people having a good time, but there wasn't any reason for me to listen to it. So I think that is it. Get your branding right and learn vocal quality. I can't emphasize, there's some geniuses out there. One of the guys I used to really love listening to, he's passed away now, is Terry Wogan. And Terry, he used to go up and used to go down, and his voice was very, very sort of sing-song. And I would listen to that all the time. And I still go over to YouTube and sort of listen to people's voices, because a guy early doors, he said to me that when you're on a podcast, you've got to be 75% more enthusiastic than you would normally. You know, you'd never go into the kitchen and go, I'm having a cup of tea today. But on a podcast, because no one can see you, you've got to put that much energy in. And some podcasters out there literally sound like they're just talking normally. And so it comes across like they want to go into a coma. And then that's not going to be something that people want to listen to continuously.
It's funny you bring up Terry Wogan, because his voice was always on in my household growing up. Yeah. And he's got a wonderful, it's a hypnotic, dare I say, voice.
Yeah, it was. I think Terry, looking back on it, Terry is one of those ones that I didn't realize I was training from until I started doing my own show. And I certainly took things from him.
Yeah. And you've obviously mentioned a lot of great pearls of wisdom in this whole interview, specifically there as well. But before we do go today, is there anything else that you want to share, or any advice that you think is worthwhile for anyone who's either starting their podcast or maybe looking to grow a podcast that they have already?
I would say certainly enjoy it, go into it, because even if the podcast doesn't go where you want it to go, i.e. global domination or whatever you're aiming for, I think you learn so much about connecting with people and building relationships. And that is the key to it all. That takes you anywhere. It's all about building a deep relationship with people. So I think that that's the number one thing. Enjoy the process and know that while you're doing it, you're learning really important life skills that you can take anywhere.
Fantastic. Well, this is such a passion of mine, and it's been so wonderful speaking with you today, David. If people are listening to this and they want to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Joinupdots.com. Simple as that.
Fantastic. Excellent. There you are. Join Up Dots. Go listen to it. Go leave a review for the show. And yeah, thanks again, David, for joining me.
Cheers, Sam. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. I hope this interview was helpful. And if you liked it, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Alternatively, you can share this episode with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. Above all, you, the listener, are an important part of our podcast growth journey, and by leaving a review and sharing the episode, you can help us expand, and in turn, we can offer you more valuable insights and podcast growth tips. Lastly, remember, you can find more helpful resources to grow your business with podcasting on our blog at podwritten.com. You'll also find a link to this in the show notes. Until next time, stay healthy, happy, and successful.